everybody. This is Mohenraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans, a production of the Speculative Literature Foundation. I'm Marianne Mohenraj.
I am Benjamin Rosenbaum, also a human.
There we go. We are contending that we are humans today.
So, I thought you were going to say we are contending with our humanity.
Perhaps, yeah. So today, I can't say, I actually am kind of contending with my humanity a little bit. I mean, not contending with, but like trying to accommodate it more. I think
making room for your humanity.
Yeah, I have, like a bad habit of getting a little bit like in my head about, just everything. And I've been trying hard to be like Marianne. It's okay to lie in bed for 2 hours and read a book with a cup of tea, and like your body will thank you for it. Your brain will thank you for it, so.
And in general, like, oh, I'm a little meat person. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not like the voice of history needing to figure out everything. I'm just one of these little goofy critters that's running around. Like, I think that's a useful perspective often.
Yeah. I've also seen one about like, there's a meme about like, we're basically plants. Like we need sunlight, we need water, like you can't forget that part. So
we're a little more troublesome than plants, but yes. Don't let your, maybe hamsters. Sure.
All right. So today we were going to talk about subgenres, Ben suggested.
Yeah, subgenres, tropes, influences, like not, like there's a way in which, well, let me say this. I feel like I was miseducated as a young writer by a kind of high modernist tradition that I should be sort of like coming up with pure creative thoughts out of the Empyrean, like this only I could have from the depths of my soul. And a corrective to that is finding that writing is full of community. And, we were also talking about but then of course there can be, so there's a potentially positive influence of finding like, oh, these are people I mean, both in the sense of laterally, like Inferno Crusher was a movement that briefly happened that I was part of, and that was fun. But also in a more general sense, like, oh, this is hot, like something is big now, right? Like we were talking about various new subgenres. So joining a bandwagon. And then also that stuff can be confining or confusing. So yeah, let's talk about, but I was going to say lateral influence, like, oh, hey, I'm writing with all these people who are writing a similar thing. And how is that energizing or misleading or whatever? And then also vertical influence, which is like, we talk a lot on the podcast about how we are children of Delaney, Le Guin. There's sort of like, and I think another kind of influence, which is sort of a magpie kind of thievery, where I go and like, I have a lot of like, stories that begin by being like, what if this were a chapter of the Bible that didn't end up in the Bible? Or what if this were, a text, kind of an epistolatory, text that was found on a Facebook thread or a 19th century letter exchange or something. You know what I mean? Like that kind of mode of like, let's go and look at a thing and go make a thing like that thing is a way to start that's less blank pagey in some ways than just like, what should I write about? So all those things.
So I kind of want to define our terms a little bit.
Sure.
Only because you sort of mentioned the high modernist kind of anxiety, and I feel like I know what you're talking about, but
okay.
I'm not sure like most of my students would, or like,
I'm not even 100% sure I really know what I'm talking about. So you define it. You have
PhD. I mean, with that, it made me think about Harold Bloom's anxiety of influence thing, right?
Yeah.
Which is this. He had this theory of poetry, and he would argue that poets struggle with the psychological pressure of their predecessors, right? Which creates like this creative anxiety that forces them to misread and revise past works to achieve originality. That's the basic idea, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so this is incredible.
Misread is such an ugly word, Mr. Bond. Anyway, go on.
He put it in quotes. So misread. So, but so I think that's kind of the core of it, is like there's this incredible pressure to be original, right? And like that. I don't know whether you felt that. I felt that.
Yeah, but I want to say there's an incredible pressure at certain cultural times and places. Because of course there are other times when being original is kind of looked askance at, and like what you have to have anxiety about proving is that you're truly in the tradition doing the thing, and not
Sure.
innovating and going off on your own. That's not like where we live culturally, but it is.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
does. It
No,
has
no, no, no,
existed.
no,
So.
no, no. That's a good point actually. And there's a great story in Dark Matter about this. And now
Mm.
I'm gonna blank on the title, but
Hmm.
it's this story in which Black people have been put into kind of cultural preserves because they're
Oh.
under
Uh-huh.
attack.
Yeah.
And there's a woman who is a traditional artist, like working within a dancer, I think, working
Yeah.
within the tradition, and has been, and decides to leave. Like, you're allowed to leave, but it's a debate within the community as to like whether, you know like, that it's important to have people who are preserving the culture, which is so under attack. And then
Yeah, and that is
her
you know what
and
I said that's not where we live, but in some sense it's not so far because there are definitely lots of. As soon as something gets sort of anthropologized, there is this anxiety about, are you doing it right? Do you know what I mean? Like, are you doing it? Or if something is just a very old tradition. I mean, like, I literally am working on a siddur, right? A Jewish prayer book, and like there, the conversation is very much like, not like we must prove we are original, but rather, dare we deviate too far? You know what I mean? Like we have two competing ideological pressures. One is that we don't want stuff that bothers us in there. We want to feel like we're saying things that are authentic to us. And the other is that as soon as you change something, some people are like, wait a minute, we've always said it that way. So that's like another. That's a world which is still in the pre-modern world way
yeah.
approach understanding of art in a sense, because it's not considered art, but it is art. Anyway. um
Yes, I think the story I'm thinking of, I'm like Googling, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's Separation Anxiety by Evie Shockley. So,
yeah,
um,
great
and
title.
and it is anthropologized. Like, they are like part of
Yeah,
what's happening. They they're encouraged to live in these
yeah,
cultural
yeah,
preservation units, but
yeah,
they're being studied all the time. And
yeah,
like, there's a point,
yeah.
there's like, I think a reference early in the story to like, they like collect their used tampons, and the anthropologists kind of like count and study them, like that kind of thing.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, 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 exactly.
it's a great piece. So
Exactly.
recommend
And I
it.
think
Dark Matter.
that's a really interesting. um that's a really interesting. I was just at a so one of the great things in Basel is that every year there's a museum night where you get,
Mm,
like, you pay 25 bucks and you get a wristband. You could go to all museums in the city, which are
mm,
otherwise pricey in Basel. Great museum city. Like, it has as many museums as DC with like a tiny fraction of the
mm-hmm,
population. Anyway, but not a tiny fraction of the population, but it's smaller.
mm-hmm.
And the Museum of Cultures. What's interesting is going to the museums and, like, traditionally, like in the sort of colonialist frame, there were like art museums, and then there were like culture museums, by which I mean other people's cultures, right? Like
Right,
anthropological
right,
museums.
sure,
And
yes.
so I went to this Museum of Cultures, which has been around since, for like at least 100 years, and was, in the old days, just going and stealing lots of people's stuff and putting it there because they were natives. And um and now it's sort of like hyper aware of that, and really like engaging with it in really interesting ways. And like, there's a lot of exhibits about how they returned stuff that they stole, and the exhibit is now about that process.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
so
yeah.
so but that's very interesting. And one thing that was really interesting was this room that was all new stuff in traditional or quasi traditional modes. So there were like, what's it called, wayang, the um Indonesian form of puppetry, where you
Yeah,
have,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
like
Yes,
the
I'm
sticks from
familiar.
below
Yep,
puppets.
yep, yep, yep.
um and But it's wayang hip hop, which is like a whole thing in Indonesia. They're all like there was a Lady Gaga, there was like the rapper, and then like other stereotypes of, like, the cop from the village, you know what I mean, like that. And they were all like extremely modern stereotypes, or like archetypes, as these Indonesian puppets. And that is actually, apparently, from the label I read in the museum, 100% the tradition, because there's a retelling of the Ramayana. But the I think it's Javanese tradition, is that they're like, you don't mess with like Rama and Sita. They're the major figures, and Hanuman or whatever.
Right.
But there's all these minor incidental
Mm-hmm.
characters who are like fools and jesters and whatever, and they are always updated. They are always like a running social commentary on the
Hmm.
time. So them being like Lady Gaga being there is actually completely unexceptional in the history of this art form because it's always whatever latest, thing is. That's what that role of that character is. Anyway, so but that's an interesting. That's at a tension where you could see that artists in some of these contexts might be under both pressures, like the modernist pressure to be original and also the pressure to prove like what this is authentic, right? Because if you want to get into a certain kind of museum, what you need to prove is that you're authentically of a characteristic representation of that sort of thing that they're anyway. So both things
It's
exist, I guess
interesting. I
is all
have a
I'm
bunch
saying.
of thoughts off of that. I mean, like, I've had a couple of different pieces of work in museums,
Yeah,
and like one of them is the Asian South Asian Institute here in Chicago. So it's that kind of
yeah,
cultural museum.
yeah,
They are very artsy. So
yeah,
like it
yeah,
is more of the you are South Asian and you make
right,
our art and
yeah,
we're going to feature you, and
right.
it's not so much about, I mean, there was a great exhibition on like an artist who worked with indigo, and like there
Hmm.
often is a historical component, but it's not a requirement to be,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
in the
Yeah, that's a
museum.
slightly
And
different than the museum
yeah,
that is like, we brought this from
yeah, right,
the
so that's
most remote part, whatever. Like they've
yeah,
done this for, that's the sort
yeah,
of weird
yeah, yeah.
anthropological vibe. But anyway, yeah.
That's
So
interesting. And then
them trying to
I'm
reinvent
also
that.
you also made me think about the Ramayana. Like, I feel like we talked about this once before, but I'll just mention that, like, I did do a retelling of the Ramayana in Bodies in Motion, and I messed with the story some, and
Hmm.
mess
Yeah,
and people got upset, right? Like
really.
I got,
Huh.
well, because it's also
Yes,
religious, right?
yes,
And
sacred.
so
Of course,
so
sure.
there's an element of like, and I got kind of anxious about it. I was
Yeah.
like, after it hadn't occurred to me, because my experience of it as someone who, my ancestors converted from Hinduism to Catholicism generations
Yeah,
ago,
yeah.
right? So my
Which is
experience
a
of the
different subject
Ramayana,
position because it's not even your sacred thing you're
it's
messing with,
not
or your
my
parents' sacred thing.
it's
Yeah,
not my sacred thing, right?
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
but I also didn't experience is that I experienced it as Ramayana comic books and
Right,
my
sure.
dad telling me the story.
Yes,
I
yes.
experienced it like an Arthurian story, right? And
Right.
so
And there's a way
it
that the distinct my experience as an American Jew is that the hardcore making a hardcore distinction between religion and culture is a thing that gets kind of like it feels to me, and I don't think this is true, and I think there are other contexts, but in my context, it's like this very sort of Protestant or like at least Christian worldview that is being sort of misapplied. It's an exonym. People come and say, which part is the religion, which part is the culture? And I'm like, I have no fucking clue what you're doing. Like, come to a Mikvah service, and they're like, but which parts are religion and which parts are culture? And I'm like, this question does not compute. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you're talking. I actually literally don't know what
yeah,
you're talking about. Like
yeah,
applied to this form. It's like saying, it's like
yes.
they're coming to a visual art show and being like, but which is the melody and which is the counterpoint? And I'm like, that's not how you talk about a painting. I don't know if that
Yes, but
analogy is quite right, but
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I don't know if that's quite what I'm talking about. Like,
yeah.
I would say there is a version of the Ramayana. You
Hmm.
could tell a version of the Ramayana, and something like
Hmm.
Sita sings the blues, that which actually includes Indonesian hand puppetry images,
Uh-huh.
is a movie by a white woman about her breakup with an Indian
Uh-huh.
guy,
Yeah.
told through the story of Sita, right? And
Uh-huh.
there's very, like, religion is not really present. I'd have to go back and see it again. There may be some, but I don't. My memory of it is that the the religious part of it has faded so far into the background. It's as if it's been excised, right? And similarly,
Okay.
for my experience of the Ramayana growing up, it didn't have a religious component. Like, when my dad was telling me the story, I didn't really know these were gods. It was just a story, right? It was a bedtime story about Rama was a prince and Sita was a princess, right? It was like a story about Indian royalty, right? And so when I was
Yeah.
aware, obviously, by the time I was writing my version of it, I was aware that there was um, a religious component, but it was so far in the background for me that, like, I just didn't even think about the fact that someone might find this offensive, or might think of this as like, you're retelling my sacred story and fucking with
Sure.
it, right? And so,
Sure.
like, when it got published and I got like hate mail about it, I had this moment of like, oh my God, what did I do? You know, like I didn't mean to be blasphemous, or, you know, that wasn't my goal. And I ended up like asking my Hindu practicing friends, I was like, did I fuck up really badly here? Right? Like, did I,
What did they say?
sorry. They said no. They said, and keep in mind, these are Hindu Americans. So, you know, Indian Americans. And so there's a wide range of opinions, but they basically told me that there are all these retellings of Ramayana, and some of them have, you know, and I had a whole thing with Lakshman and Sita fantasizing about Lakshman, and that was what people were upset about. And they were like, you are not the first person to come up with that. That has been in various movies, TV shows, you know, like
I'm not
it's
saying
come
that
up
there's
before.
like I
So
know this is a digression, and if you find this
yeah,
boring, please feel
yeah.
free to cut me off and we can reroute. But I am interested in this religious versus culture question briefly because it's something I'm actually wrestling with right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very funny. I guess I could tell this story. There's a very funny thing happening right now at Migvan, right, the
Mm-hmm.
synagogue that I help run, where I there's essentially, culturally speaking, three groups of Jews in Basel. There are the Jews from Switzerland and the surrounding countries who have a particular set of cultural norms. They traditionally were Orthodox. A lot of them didn't particularly like being Orthodox. They were lax. They didn't agree. They thought it was dumb, but they didn't have another option. That was the synagogue,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of them come to Migvan with their aesthetic expectations of being just like what they had. They would sort of feel most comfortable if it were just like the Orthodox synagogue, except for the things they disagree with, like men and women should sit together, and it's great that the woman's a rabbi and whatever, the rabbi's a woman, etc. But like the melodies and everything, like they don't have, that's their context, right? And then there's expats, like American Jews, who
Mm-hmm.
Migvan, a lot of them come to Migvan because it looks like a synagogue, because that's what Reform Judaism is, a dominant form of Judaism in America. So
Mm-hmm.
like, in fact, it's a little stuffy for some of them. I mean, like if anything,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of Reform Jews are like rabbis strolling around with a guitar, right? Like that is sort
Right.
of like the post, American 1960s Great Awakening, hippie
Mm-hmm.
world, like in fact, got into the synagogues. Anyway, so they're expecting, the synagogue to be a fun place that you go because it's happening, right? And
Mm-hmm.
because
Now.
American synagogues have known since Mordecai Kaplan wrote Judaism as Civilization in the 1920s, that they're competing with the movies. Nobody has to go. It's not like the old
Mm-hmm.
country where you're a Jew, so you have to go do the Jewish thing. It's like, if you want, you could go to the movies. So they, what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they had to up their game. Um, but there's a third community, which is all the Israelis who are
Mm-hmm.
in Basel, and uh, you know, at this point in history, I feel like many of them subtly are almost refugees. Like they don't want to, they're
Mm-hmm.
getting out. And some of them, that's complicated. But like I certainly feel, after during the recent war and everything, that we wanted to make it as much like welcome them and connect with them, and that was part of our job. But we have traditionally had trouble attracting the Israelis because essentially the Israelis, if they're traditional religious, they go to Igebe because that's religious, and if they're not, then they're not like Americans, where the Reformed Jews are like, let's use God as a metaphor and dance,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, have a cool like hip hop beat to our Adon Olam. They're like secular, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really, even though I've been there a bunch. I didn't think I really understood what that meant until I had this conversation recently. So, you know, uh, I presume many of our listeners probably know what like Shabbat looks like, right? You light candles, you say Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, right? You eat some food, right? That's Shabbat, and there, a Shabbat service, you light the candles, you say sing extra more songs, and then you eat some food. And Hanukkah, you light 8 candles, right? You sing Baruch Atah Adonai, you light 8 candles. You have latkes, right? It's you open presents. I mean, it's like, for me as an American Jew, these are the same thing. Just one of them happens every week, and the other one happens once a year for 8 nights. So I would talk to these Israeli families, and they would be like, "Oh, we came to Hanukkah. It was so great. We loved it. We love the rabbi. It's such a great vibe. The kids had so much fun. We would love to get involved. Tell us about your programs." And I was like, "That's amazing. Why don't you come on Friday? We have a service. Why don't you come then, and we can talk. We can meet up. We can talk." And they were like, "Oh no, we don't do services." And I,
Mm-hmm.
as an American Jew, was mystified horrified by this. I was like, you literally light candles and say Baruch atah Adonai and sing some more songs, and then you eat. That is literally what you're doing in both cases. I was completely puzzled, and it took me weeks of thinking about this, and suddenly I went, oh, it's the majority religion. I have to translate this to American Christianity. We came to your Christmas party. We loved Santa. We love, it was great. The kids had a great time. And then I'm like, do you want to come to church on Sunday? And they're like, we don't do church. Like for them, for that particular kind of Jews, clearly because they've had religion, a very narrow definition of what Judaism stuffed down their throats by the theocrats who are trying to, run the country. And cause World War III. They're acutely aware of the distinction between religion and culture.
Sure.
Which is funny because I don't think their ancestors were. And for me, I'm like, why is Shabbat religion and Hanukkah's culture? Do you know what I mean? Like that's when I say, like, I don't see the line. And I mean, I didn't grow up with Ramayana comic books, and I can't apply this directly to your thing, but I do have this question about, like, because when you change things from other kinds of comic books, people also get upset. Right? There's a lot of people for whom have an experience of the sacred or the way that people are like, that's not the way. You can't do that with Spider-Man. Like the way that people have that.
I think you're playing a little fast and loose with sacred as a term here, right? So,
I mean, I am intentionally using a much broader definition of sacred, but a big part of my experience is finding the received definition of sacred frustratingly narrow in a way that materially affects my life. Do you know what I mean? Like
I see that you're struggling with this, and it sounds hard.
But do you know what I mean? It's like people are like, oh no, that's the religious part because you believe, and I'm like, that is not.
No, we discussed this before. Like you do not take belief as being a dividing line, and it was when I was growing up. But I think, and that I think when we talked about it before, you were kind of saying that is not as much of a thing in Judaism, and now it sounds like, well, maybe it is for these Israelis. I don't know, but
see, no, it's not about belief; it's about practice. I mean, belief is a slightly different topic because nobody's. I mean, I think it is more about belief for them probably, but I'm not sure when they say the line between religion and culture. I'm not sure that it's belief because really they're not mad that the Orthodox are telling them that there's a God. They're mad that the Orthodox are throwing stones at their car if they drive on Saturday. Like they're not performing the rituals correctly. That's the right. Like, which is my frame of reference is very much like it's very hard for me to understand on some level that people who have a Christmas tree and open presents under it are not Christians, because that looks like they're literally doing Christianity. Those are Christian rituals. I mean, they're pagan rituals.
They're pagan rituals too. I mean, like, I don't know,
but all the Jewish stuff is not originally Jewish either. Like a lot of it, all the Jewish rituals come.
Well, okay, but
100% a Greek philosophical drinking.
I mean, maybe this is
it's syncretism.
I don't know. We may just have to agree to disagree here, right? But my experience of the world and religion in general is that I grew up in the Catholic Church, did the stuff, realized at one point that I didn't believe in God, left the church, didn't miss it. Missed some of the rituals a little bit, like the midnight mass, the singing. I like the songs, right? Happy to keep doing Christmas, which I think of my Christmas as a completely secular Christmas. There is no mention of Jesus or God in any of it. It is a winter holiday.
It literally is named Christ.
I know, but I would be just as happy to like do everything on solstice and call it solstice, right? Like that would actually be more in line with how I think about it, right? So
but then why don't you?
Well, I just have to like convince because the school schedule is oriented around Christmas, right? Like because America is a Christian country primarily, and it has structured everything that way. That's when you get vacation.
But do you have Christmas at home or do you have solstice at home? Why not just have solstice? I mean, you might have holiday then or might not, but you could still like have a. solstice ritual on the solstice if
I
you
mean,
like
I
that
guess I
better.
don't really care what I call it, right? Like you seem invested in this. I'm not invested in like the fact that it's called Christmas is meaningless to me. It doesn't matter, right? I think of the pagan stuff. I sing the pagan songs. You know, if I'm going to sing anything, it's about middle of winter. Let's have a party, right? Like and celebrate each other and eat a lot, right? Um, so the you know if they change the name tomorrow, it wouldn't matter to me. It would matter to a lot of people, right? It wouldn't matter to me. And um
If they change the name. So what you're saying is that it's yeah, okay, that makes sense. You're saying that it is the what's important to you is being part of a communal norm. Because you could change it, but you're not. But that's because what's important to you is not the specific name; it's that that's what they call it, and if they changed it, then you change.
yeah, well, I would, yeah, I mean again, like I don't know, I'm kind of confused. Like if I went around and tried to say solstice every time people were saying Christmas, it would
Yeah.
cause great confusion, right? Like I would have to
Oh, what
explain
you're
it
saying? Oh, are
constantly.
you telling me that if you had a different holiday you celebrated in December and you had to constantly explain that to people, that you would have a lot of tiresome conversations? Wow, it never occurred to me, Marianne.
Well, I don't really, I don't, since I don't care about it, since I'm not invested in it, I don't
Well,
need to have those
I do just want to
conversations, right?
gently
Yeah.
say that if you
Yeah.
are the norm, if you are the
Yeah.
unmarked state, then
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like you're invested, right? It's like it is easy for white people to say, "Well, I don't see color; it's not important to me." And when they
Yeah.
say that, people of color are generally like, you know what I mean? Like I feel like maybe you haven't looked at
Sure.
this very
But
closely. Like when you're like, my experience of the world is smooth and unremarked, and so I don't care about any of these things you're talking about. I just perform them all the way I'm supposed to, and but they're not important. It's like it just is like, yeah, but you notice that you're at the center, and that's why it's not important. The feeling that it's unimportant and trivial is a feeling that you have when you're at the center,
so
right?
Christianity has not attacked my solsticeness, right? Or my paganness or whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't call myself pagan either, right? I'm not
But I know
actually,
people who are
yeah.
pagan and go out of their way to celebrate
Right.
pagan. Like they
Right. Right.
actually go.
That's what I'm
I've
saying.
been to Beltane's. I've been to solstice
Yes,
festivals. Like that's it.
exactly.
I
So
recognize
I'm
them as
not
pagan. When I see them, I'm like, oh, they're not Christian. They're pagan. Like that's
right. So I'm not pagan. I'm not claiming to be pagan.
okay.
I
Sure.
used to live with pagans. I've been to their ceremonies too.
Yeah, they're great. I'm
It's
a
not
big fan.
my, yeah, yeah, but it's not my
Sure.
thing, right? Like
Sure.
I mostly
Sure.
like throwing parties. I like decorating and I like having food and having people over. And I'll take any excuse. And maybe this is partly coming out of Sri Lankan culture too, is, Sri Lanka
Mm-hmm.
was a
Yes.
polytheistic
Yes. Sure.
society,
Sure.
and we had like a party like every 4 days. If
Right.
you
Right.
look at
Right. Right.
like
Right. Right.
historically, like like there's
Yeah.
all of these people with all their religions and all their
Right.
traditions, and we just have them all. And maybe you're the
Yes.
one who cooks if
Yes.
it's the cultural group that you belong to, but you're
Right.
sharing it with your neighbors who are of a different cultural group, right? And my dad has great memories of like, the Sinhalese were having Sinhalese New Year, and they would make milk rice and they would bring it to our house. And, like then we would get to have the milk rice. And like, we didn't like to
But I
work a
think
lot, is
that is
part of
my
my impression,
understanding.
is that we had a
Right.
lot of
Right.
holidays.
There's a lot of because that's the way I always used to think before America became so toxically xenophobic when in the 90s when it felt like America was very open to immigrants and Europe wasn't. I used to say that my America, the Americans I knew, their attitudes toward a new immigrant group arriving was like, "We more restaurants, right?" Like it's
Yeah.
like people come, you're like, "Ooh, I can't wait to try that food." And I feel like that was the traditional Sri Lankan attitude toward religion. Somebody show up and be like, "I have a religion," and they're like, "Awesome, more food," right? Like,
Yes.
when's your party? Like that's
Yeah, yeah.
which right, but you'll notice that when you're speaking out of that frame, it does sound like the dividing line between religion and culture is kind of fuzzy, right? Because
So I would say it
that's the
is.
fun part, right? Is it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
nobody's
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about what is your grandfather is probably not really invested in the distinctions of belief of when he was going to all these parties and being like, you make this kind of milk rice? Like he was not like, but what is your take on the Trinity? Maybe
Right.
he
So
was. He was
so
Catholic, but
I'm not sure what we're arguing about here, Ben, but like
anyway, we can go
you're
back
very
on.
invested in this. I'm really not. So I
I,
just I like I
I
just
don't know. I
like so
was
like
just saying
part of
you were
it. Like, here, let
challenging
me.
me. I said I don't understand the distinction in religion and
I know.
culture,
Well,
and
let me
you
finish
said
what
I
I
think
was.
you're yeah.
So well, let me finish. Well, I challenged your use of sacred, but that's a separate thing. But the to finish what I was trying to say
Uh huh.
before, like, so I was raised in the church. I left the church at 12. You know, all of my Christmases since then, I've not put up a nativity. I have not, you know, like I have many friends who do put up nativities, right? Like that is
Okay.
their, and it's important to them to go to mass, and it's like it is their Christmas is a Christian one, right? When I went to the Bay
Uh-huh.
Area, I was surrounded by lots of agnostics, lots of neo pagans, lots of
Lots of
people,
Gnostics. I'm gonna go to those parties. Oh,
agnostics,
agnostics. I thought you knew a lot of Gnostics. I was
dude.
like, that's
and then,
amazing.
and
Hook me up with
then
the Bay
you
Area
know,
Gnostics. Oh,
no, lots of
agnostics. Okay.
agnostics, lots of neo pagans, lots of people who say, "Oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual." Right? It's a very
Uh-huh.
different framework. Um, and then when I went to Salt Lake City, I was then immersed in a society that was mostly Mormon, right? And
Uh-huh.
one of the things that happened is just if we go back to, somehow we're going to get this back to writing, is that when I was writing
Yes.
Bodies in Motion, which is starts in Sri Lanka in the 1930s and comes forward down to family lines,
Yeah.
I realized at some point in Salt Lake City I had written most of the book without mentioning religion at all, and these people would have been in some sense religious. Some would believe, some would not
Uh-huh.
believe, but they would have just gone to church or synagogue or whatever temple, not synagogue probably, but they would have gone as a social norm, right? And it was
Sure.
that whole layer was missing from the book because it's not a part of my life, right? Like it is, I live a entirely secular life, right? And so that's
I
the, I guess, the distinction I'm
Here's
trying
the
to
thing.
make.
I've
Yeah.
been to your house. I know how you live. Also, the
Yeah.
culture you're describing is the one I grew up with. It's the majority culture. I know the rules. I know what I know that that's the way that most people who I grew up with see the world. I just don't actually get it. It's okay. I mean, I understand it intellectually. What I'm saying is when you say some of them, the funny thing is when you said some of them are Gnostics, I thought you said Gnostics, and I was like, amazing.
Right.
What were their rituals like? What's a
Mhm.
Gnostic do? And then you were like agnostics. My immediately feeling was like, oh, okay, well that's not a thing. I know it's a thing. I know what the word agnostic means. I know many people identify as agnostic. I know it's important to them, but there's no agnostic parties. There's no agnostic songs. There's no in the category where I would place, like if I'm dividing up in the world, the thing that Judaism is, there is not an equivalent thing that agnostic is. There's no
No, it's
agnostic.
true.
You can't go to
Yeah.
an agnostic. That's like saying you're a deontologist. Sure, I believe that there are agnostics and deontologists, and people who are like efficient altruists, and like there's lots of philosophical positions you could have, but they don't have any things you teach kids, so they're
So
not
so I
what
would say
I'm talking about. I mean,
so
sure, you
the,
teach kids. I mean, sure, yeah, you teach. Obviously, you teach kids. Utilitarians teach their kids utilitarian
yeah,
ethics,
yeah. Yeah,
but
no, no,
it's
no.
not like
But
agnostic is in the category of utilitarian.
I would
It's a
think of it,
philosophical position.
for me, this is like an X and Y axis, right? And
Yeah.
like the X axis, let's say, is the axis of belief, religion, sacred, etc. In the, and there I'm at 0 on the X axis, right? The Y axis is ritual, parties, all of this kind of thing, which I love, which is a great part of being human. It just doesn't intersect with religion for me. And
But that is what
so,
I call
well,
religion.
I
That's the
understand.
axis I call
For me, I
religion.
understand. I'm
Okay. I
Benjamin.
understand. I understand. I
I'm
get it.
saying for me,
Okay.
it's not
Okay. That's
religious.
great.
I
I
do,
know. I know.
I do. Where I get that, and this is why I resonate maybe more with the pagans than anything else,
Yeah.
is that I I I find that the seasons and cycles of nature are a
Mm-hmm.
great reason to party.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, all of the stuff I do tends to be tied to, it's the dead of winter, let's have a party. Spring is here, let's have a party. It's midsummer,
I
let's have
want to
a
talk about
party,
the
right?
sacred for a minute because I feel like now, like, it's very difficult to articulate my position without falling into like the words that you're using is the way the rules are set up. I am living in a world
Mm,
where the rules are set up, right? So, like, I find myself trying to communicate, and I just swing between your two axes. Like if I try to
Mm-hmm.
say, when you say, well, I'm a 0 on the belief scale, that's what religion is. I'm like, and then I say, no, it's the parties. And then you're like, okay, now you're talking about culture. And then I also feel weird. It's like I am actually talking about the experience of the sacred. The reason that what I felt at those pagan rituals I went to was an experience of the sacred, like the sacred in nature, like the resplendent Milky Way far from the city is an experience of the sacred. It,
I mean, I
it,
know people use sacred that way. I don't, right? Like,
I,
so that's fine. I mean, it's
I don't
we
know
can
what else it
have
means.
different
I don't understand
experiences.
how a theological position, like an intellectual argument about theology, which are interesting. No, I do understand. An intellectual argument about theology, much like a work of art or the night sky, can be a mode of access to the sacred. But it just feels meager if the sacred is reduced to that. Anyway, how do we get on this topic? I just want to say, you think I'm very attached to this. What keeps happening is I say what I think are unremarkable things, and you challenge me on them, and then we talk about them, and then you say I'm attached. All I'm saying is that agnostics aren't really a thing. That's I'm not. I don't. You don't have to agree with me. They are a thing. They're like deontologists, but it's not a religion.
It's not a
Anyway,
religion. It's absolutely not a
okay,
religion.
right.
We're 100% agreement on that. So,
So it doesn't go in the same box. It's not like you're Jewish or agnostic. That's not an or. That's like saying
well, this is
you're
again
Jewish or
where
tall.
I think of the scale, right? Like if you're the agnostic is at 0, right? And then you can fill it up with some more stuff. So, but anyway, it's
Wait,
okay.
wait, wait. Which thing? More. Oh, the agnostic is 0 of rituals, and then you
Well,
could fill it
both.
up with
I
more.
mean, honestly, agnostic is 0 of belief and rituals. It's 0, 0, right? So, so the agnostic part
I
is not
guess.
the
Well, then I don't
agnostic.
know what the difference between. Oh, because atheists. That's actually fair.
Yeah,
Agnostic is at
yeah,
0 because atheists have a strong belief.
they do have a
I
strong
guess.
belief. Yeah, I never
Yeah.
understood atheists either. So, like, I'm really, you know,
Anyway, I think how did we get on this? The way we got on this is we were
you were
talking about the
talking about
Ramayana.
your.
You were talking about having worked on, told a story from the Ramayana and how people had a reaction. You were like, oh no, I didn't even think of this as religion. And I was just saying, and I think it's just interesting because other comic books that other people read, if you'd messed with their version of the comic book, they would also freak out. And
Yeah, I
it's
just
not,
think
and
it's not. I don't think it's
and
the
this is
same
where
freak out, but
this is where I
yeah,
find the category of religion useful. I'm troubled about the category of religion, but where I find it useful is I do think that's different. And I do think that religion is useful as a proximate category to avoid worse shit legally. I think there should be a difference between. I don't think that people's feelings about Jack Kirby should be protected under the law, as a protected class, the way that people's feelings about Hinduism or Judaism should. So I do think that is a useful distinction as a
mm-hmm.
matter of practical politics.
Okay, I see where you're
I do think
going.
it
All
falls apart
right.
under closer examination, but I think it's a good line in the sand for like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think that,
I mean,
it doesn't need to
I
be a
think
fully coherent concept for it to be legally useful for the protection of certain minority groups, right?
maybe like the Kirby thing I'm really having trouble with. It's so far from it, but maybe a more useful thing for me anyway is like the way some people are very invested in gender roles, and
Yeah,
like to them
sure.
it is
Yeah,
it's so important that
yeah.
it does take on, like, I don't know if sacred, I still probably wouldn't use sacred, but something related to that, right? It has this immense importance that if you poke at it, and if if a guy
Yes.
wears a skirt out
Because
in
it's your life
public.
ways. They're
Yeah,
these
yeah,
fundamental
yeah,
life
yeah,
ways that you understand the universe through that
yeah.
mediate your experience of everything. And 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 part of being a grown-up in the world is being generous toward other people and curious and open to other people's life ways instead of freaking out when you see somebody
Hmm.
practicing a different life way on the tram. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's good to be narrow-minded about it, but like they are important to people,
Hmm.
but it's kind of like it is, I mean, traditional gender roles is a fandom, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the way that Judaism is a fandom, like fandom is a really good way of understanding religion, I think. Like it is a collective endeavor that involves people's passions and creativity and really talks to them deeply about what's important in the world and can order their way of thinking about life. If
I mean,
people are
you and I
serious
are.
about their Harry Potter houses or their, Star Trek is a way you fundamentally think about life. Kirk is a imitatio Kirkai is a fundamental principle for you. Like it
I
is a way.
mean,
It is the
so, but
exemplar Kirk or Spock exemplars of how one should be, ways of understanding the good. Like it's a
yeah,
lens through
but
which
there is a difference, Ben. There's a difference. So, like, you and I might agree that gender roles are a fandom, but I know plenty of people who would not agree and who would say it is a biological fact or a truth or whatever.
well,
Like
they can't think the roles are a biological fact, but they can think that. Well, anyway, yes, sure. I don't know.
no, they
Whatever.
will. They do in fact think the rules are a biological fact. I mean, they think it is. They
Okay.
do. There are lots of people who think that,
They think
right?
that the
And so,
biology. To be fair to Steelman, their argument, they think that biological facts are what they are, and that means that gender roles are the most appropriate way of responding to our biology. Like the gender roles that have come down to us are the correct and optimal way of living with the bodies that we have. That's what they think.
sure. Yeah. I mean,
To
I think
Steelman, their argument,
I think some of them
right?
would say it more strongly than that, right? Like, I mean, I have plenty of students who kind of come in with well, that would be unnatural, right? Like they really
Okay.
experience it as this is the way the world is, this is the way the
Uh-huh.
universe is, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that to
Sure.
me is very different from Star Trek, which is a useful paradigm, right? So, but
Okay, well,
it's
the
just
point of
yeah,
calling religion a fandom is to queer it in the technical
yeah, yeah,
sense, right?
yeah,
What I am, yes, I am indeed saying that we should denaturalize our
yeah.
understandings of the world and not see them as like I am advocate. This isn't a sterile antiseptic description. I am advocating for a way of looking at the world in which we denaturalize the lenses through which we fundamentally see the world and that structure our ethical and moral perceptions and our experience of the sublime and our sense of who we are in the world and how to be a person in the world, that we not see those as like, that we try to notice that they're not just kind of like invisible, like I'm just this way, but that they actually are practices and that they are communal practices. And fandoms, I think, is a great way of thinking about them because they
Yeah.
aren't just intellectual. They aren't just like, well, I hold these positions. And the problem with looking at a scale from atheist to agnostic to religious is sort of like as if you held some kind of logical position. And that's not how people relate to Star Trek or, Judaism. Like it's actually in an absorbed, emotional, embodied way, communal way of seeing the world that is the interesting category, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think, yeah. Yes.
okay.
I don't
I think this was
disagree.
number 3 of this.
Yeah, yeah, I know. We keep coming back to and
Let's get back.
it's like I'm happy inhabiting your way of looking at things. It's
Sure.
just like I understand it. It makes sense. It's coherent. That's all good.
Excellent. Well, I'm not trying to
it's
convert you. I'm not trying.
yeah,
I don't want you to
yeah.
inhabit my.
It's
You don't need
it's
to like inhabit it full time. I just like to
yeah.
be seen.
So I would say, yeah, yeah, no, that's good. That's all good. As long as
Good.
you also remember that my life, like, I can go many years without thinking about religion, right? And also the sacred,
I
like
know that you
that's,
can go many
yeah.
years without thinking about the things that you call religion. Yes, I'm aware.
Well, but I think also more than that, like,
Well, but
but yes, okay, but
since I'm
anyway.
calling Star Trek your religion, we know that you can't go years without thinking about Star Trek, and therefore, like
Well,
ipso
but
facto.
I can if they're not pushing new shows on me all the time, right? I can and I
But they
did, right?
are.
Yeah, but
Okay.
they are,
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. But I don't know. I mean,
like
I
it's
knew
not.
you in the dark times when there was no new Star Trek coming out, and I feel like you, even then, would occasionally reference, that as a way of seeing the world, like the aspirations of the Federation, the joie de vivre of Kirk, and his,
I do
problematic but
not.
endearing.
I don't think
I
we
don't
had
know.
those conversations back before they started pushing all the new Star Trek. But you knew me then, but we didn't talk about
I
Star
don't
Trek.
know. I remember knowing that you were a Star Trek fan and coming.
Hey humans, We hope you've been enjoying this episode of the MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans podcast. As you may have heard, signups are currently open for the 2026 Science Fiction and Fantasy Writing Workshop. Join us at Marianne's lovely home in Oak Park, Illinois for a week of critiquing, eating, learning, writing, and community building. Here you'll meet other writers that are on your level and looking to take their work to the next one. If you're interested, you can learn more on our website at speclit.org. That's speclit.org. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Let's get back to influence and genres. And I don't know how we got, because of the story. We were talking about story. We're talking about anthropology. This is all connected. We were originally, I'm going to bring it home. We were originally talking about the high modernist anxiety of being original. And therefore, because originality is you were going to define the terms. You were saying in Harold Bloom's world, in this world that you and I both imbibed in the 80s when we were in, undergraduates or whatever, this idea that originality is the hallmark, is the distinguishing hallmark and goal of the artist. And therefore, since influence is real, people's anxiety and how they respond to this danger of influence, since they're supposed to be original. And then we were parenthetically contrasting that with worlds and traditions in which originality is not the goal, and indeed in which you might find yourself in a situation where you kind of had to prove that you weren't too original, rather than proving you're original enough. But let's get back to the modernist thing and what you were saying about.
Well, let's talk about Arthurianism. I think this is a good transition because
okay.
I don't think there are a lot of people who think of King Arthur as a god, right? So we can leave that whole thing aside for now.
Sure.
And because there is a long tradition of retellings of Arthur from 12th century Malory to 12th century Crichton to 12th,
kind of retellings all the way down, really.
Tennyson. Well,
since we don't know what the original tellings were, right?
8th century Arthur, Battle of Badon, historical figure. That's the original. So there is an original.
Sure.
So then retellings from that point forward, right? And so. I would argue that's fan fiction. Like all of those are fan fiction, right?
Sure.
And and yet we don't have the same. I think it's interesting that we don't have the same literary classism around it that we do for much of the rest of fan fiction today, right? And so, when no one says, "Oh, well, Mallory, that was just fan fiction. Oh, Tennyson, that was just fan fiction. T.H. White, fan fiction."
Well, nobody complains about fan fiction until they own the copyright on something, right?
No, but lots of people
was fan fiction.
No, but
are there things people complain about from the 18th century, from the before modern? Are there things people like? Does anybody complain about Shakespeare being fan fiction, or there are no pre-modern examples of them complaining, right? It's only the modern thing they complain about.
I guess I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that I'm embedded in an English department, right? The English department is very willing to take T.H. White seriously, to take Tennyson seriously. They, I suspect, are. I mean, there's been a shift. Pop culture is now a field of study, right? But there is still a desire to make a distinction between what is quote unquote literary. This is one of my bugaboos that makes me crazy, but and things that are not. And it's about attention to prose and structural experimentation and all of that kind of stuff.
Supposedly it is, but honestly, there's a lot of attention to prose and structural experimentation on AO3, and that still wouldn't count.
Well, it might if they looked at it long enough to understand it, but that's a separate question. But there's an assumption. There's an assumption of that there is highbrow and lowbrow, right? And this kind of distinction. And this is why my son, who reads fan fiction, he's 16, is embarrassed to tell me that he reads fan fiction because he thinks, oh, my mom is a writer and an English professor, and she's going to look down on fan fiction, which I do not. For the record, do not.
Well, of course, sure.
But he has this. He had this assumption in his head, and I think it's because there is a, I can't think of a term other than redheaded stepchild, which is a terrible racist term, but like but like the kind
Sure.
of that it is lesser in some sense. And I think,
but I don't think, I mean, what's interesting about it is, I mean, yes, of course, I'm aware of the phenomenon you're talking about. I'm wondering what the actual causative factors are, because for instance, there's an entire huge section of AO3 which is real people fan fiction. In fact, that's like a, kind of part of the genesis, right? The whole Harry Styles and whatever, right? Like where they're literally just writing fiction about real people, like the way,
my students, one of my students brought in
like Lin-Manuel Miranda writing Hamilton, right?
One of my students brought in a K-pop band fan fiction.
Right, exactly.
And
except it's about Blackpink, right? Like, it's like literally Hamilton, except it's Blackpink, right? That's so obviously those aren't different in terms of any actually intrinsic factor of like originality. You're not taking somebody else's work. You're writing about people, historical figures, right? Like real people who exist, but that you don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like I don't think they are like, I don't think if you went to the snobs in your department and are like, but you're just talking about fan fiction as in derivative works. You're not talking about like the BTS fan fiction, right? They would probably be like, no, we're also talking about like, they don't have a higher regard for the BTS writing on AO3 than they do for the Harry Potter writing, do they? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't.
This is so far out of their realm. I'm not sure that you would have to do a lot of defining of terms to like be able to have the conversation, right?
But I guess I just don't think that the stink of the popular, the stink of the people, the stink of the sans-culottes, I don't think it's. I think the argument that it has something to do with it being a derivative work is specious, because that's not really what they're reacting to. Do you know what I mean? Like that's something that maybe that industry that makes that there was. Fan fiction makes copyright holders anxious, and there was an era where people were freaking out about like violation of copyright in various ways. But that isn't really.
No, but
like, you know what I mean? Like that's sort of separate.
But let me give you just an example from class yesterday. One of my students was just like they were just talking to each other in between things, and one of them said, was Wicked any good? And he's like, and the other one was saying, yeah, it's like, it's basically Wizard of Oz fan fiction. And the other guy laughed, right? And that laughter, like there is a connotation with fan fiction. Wicked is great. Like Gregory Maguire wrote an amazing book.
Right.
I thought it was really interesting.
Also Romeo and Juliet is not bad. Like it was all fan fiction. It was all fan fiction. Shakespeare's all riffing off of these. There was no copyright, so everybody was like, "I'm going to rewrite this revenge tragedy."
But what I'm trying to point to is that when he called it fan fiction, the other guy laughed, right? And he laughed because there is a general cultural assumption of it being a lesser thing, right? And not because it's necessarily derivative. I guess that is not the reason. I mean, that's part of it, right?
I think there is an association. I think yes, I agree. When the guy said, "Oh, it's basically fan fiction," and the guy laughed, he is essentially the joke there is the I mean, not joke. The funny thing there is the association of these two different things that fan fiction points to. One of which is produced for free by anonymous people and given away for free and sort of by young people, and like it's just sort of like not high culture, no gatekeepers. And then the other part of it is that it is derivative, and that it's a derivative work, right? Like that it is based on some other thing. And those are not totally causally unconnected, because if you are an anonymous person sending things out there for free, you are unlikely to it's far harder to win attention if you're like, I have a completely new thing that you've never heard of. Whereas if you're participating in a flow of culture, I mean, really what it is folk culture, right? Like also if you're like when you're doing like everybody does their murder ballad or their version of like their version of House of the Rising Sun or whatever. Like it's like folk culture is not stuck on originality the way that modernist high culture is. It's sort of like you want to, if you're arriving at a town and taking out your banjo, you want to get your listeners on the same page quickly, so you're going to tap into their existing cultural things and then put your own spin on them, right? So that they're excited, because all art is balanced between familiarity and the novel, right? And novelty.
I agree with all that. I do think there's there's a assumption of maybe different goals, right? So like you think of like my first encounter with something that was explicitly fan fiction was Kirk Spock / mimeographed at a sci-fi convention, right? Like in boxes under the table, not on top of the table, because it was sexually explicit. And so there's a sort of an interesting question about like, what is literature for? What is fiction for? And if your assumption, if it's that it's to be artistic in a highbrow kind of way, to write something original and new, that is very at odds with, well, what if your assumption is it's to give you pleasure? It's to not just entertain, but to, I mean, possibly just entertain, but also to if we're going to give I'm teaching a food writing course right now, and we're talking about like the pleasures of like, you read these food descriptions. I warned them. I was like, I'm sorry guys, like this class is at 11 o'clock. I recommend eating something first, because you're going to be hungry. And they were like, by the second class, they were like, I'm hungry. And I'm like, I warned you, right? Because you're reading these descriptions that are then activating the body. You salivate, you like, like you're getting engaged in a way that is not particularly intellectual. And
I get this may end up like the religion conversation in a way, but it's like, I just wonder if it's all pleasure, right? You know what I mean? It's sort of like, I don't know. Once again, I'm presented with a set of definitions. Like, well, there's reading just for pleasure, and then there's this highbrow edification, and I'm like, I think it's just all different kinds of pleasure. Much like I'm like, I think this is just all different kinds of people behaving.
No. I agree, but I think so in the food course, like some of the people we're reading are highbrow people who have a scene of food writing, right? And so we're just including like, here's where they spent 3 paragraphs in Proust, describing oysters or whatever it might be, right? So it's not that they can't dip into that, but there is I don't know. I mean, this goes back to it goes back to the queering thing, right? And like the reason it mattered that it was sexually explicit was because you were not supposed to talk about this. You were not supposed to dwell on it. You were not supposed to spend a lot of time enjoying the descriptions of Kirk and Spock going at it, or Kirk and Spock having intense relationship conversations. That also, was not really what literature was supposed to be for, right? And so, I think
I don't know. I just think neither of us. Partly, I think we're just on the same page here, because neither of us believes that is less.
No, I don't.
Like when you describe that, when you're sort of like, there are these people hiding under the table because you weren't supposed to think about pleasure in this way.
Right.
That sounds pretty high art, like not in the sense of what the gatekeepers are saying or whatever.
Right.
But if we were going to take the pretension of the gatekeepers seriously, and be like, I mean, of course, this is unsurprising because we're both children of Delaney, and this is part of his whole thing. But like, if you're going to take the pretension of the gatekeepers seriously, that art is supposed to like be novel in the sense that it explores some facet of, like, the great goal of modernism, to deeply explore some facet of human experience that otherwise has lain untouched. The idea that you're like, well, we don't think about this in our polite society, that sounds like where the artist should go, does it not? If they are so,
I mean, we're in agreement. I mean, I think there's a way in which this gets gendered, that, that's women's stuff, and so it's
also
less important.
Totally.
And
also it's kids writing it. That's another big part of it. It's like fan fiction is like anything young women are doing, like that's the most, right?
Yeah.
Like, which is funny because as far as I can tell, our culture is actually, if there's a demographic group that is generating culture the fastest, it's like 13-year-old girls, right? If you just look at if you just had some kind of objective measure of like etymologically where are new words generated, I would think you would find that. And not, I say girls rather than boys just because partly just because girls are more social, right? Like in our culture, like they're like, I'm not to throw 13-year-old boys under the bus. I think 13-year-olds are very good at generating culture, but I think that the girls are really doing the work because of the necessity to be novel when you're trying to explain your experience in a way that, is new, right? Like your parents already have words for things, but you want to make your own words. And I don't know, that's just a very strong drive. And a lot of the things, like a lot of I feel like a lot of, and this is a vast overgeneralization, but I feel like a lot of like, because now I'm thinking like, well, Leonard Cohen was going strong in his 80s, but there's a certain kind of like revolutionary pop that is really stuff people came up with as teenagers and then maybe only recorded in their 20s. Do you know what I mean? Like it was, but it's
So
sort of
I
like
don't know what you
this
mean.
engine of,
I mean,
anyway,
I understand what you're
whatever.
saying, but I don't know enough about it to have an
Yeah.
opinion.
Okay.
So
Moving on.
But let me
Let's
go back.
get back to the other thing.
So let me go back to the thing because I agree
Yeah.
that we're on the same page, you and I, intellectually. I will
Yeah.
admit, emotionally, I do sometimes have some trouble with this for my own writing only. Just because, so, recently I've been reading someone I hope we'll get on the podcast if she's up for it, Rebecca Thorne's Cozy Lesbian Fantasies. Pirate's Life for Tea is the second one. I can't remember what the first one is, but there's a bookstore or a coffee shop or a tea shop. I think it's a tea shop.
Yeah.
And pirates and
Yeah.
lots of relationship conversations and lots of nice lesbian sex. And
lots of what on AO3 tag is called fluff, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the yeah.
So I enjoy that. I enjoy reading it. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I could read if I hit a set of characters and whatever that I like, I could read about them endlessly probably. And yet when I sit down to figure out like what's my next project going to be, and I casually mention on Facebook like sometimes I feel like I just want to write about like ancient Sri Lankan cooks sitting around and dating and whatever, and people are like, yes, write that sounds great. And I have this emotional reaction of like, oh, like I'm supposed to be a serious literature person and I have a PhD and like, should I really be writing like cozies about cooking and magic? I know it sounds so snobby.
That's just
when
funny
I say
to me
it
because
that way, but
I mean, no, I understand the impulse you're talking about, but it just sounds funny to me because in some ways it's like I guess I just have like I guess there's a distinction between like in a way I do have this Delaney-esque or Duchampian idea that like what is forbidden to high art is the most interesting high art, right? Like in some sense, it's like as soon as you have the academy of like mid 19th century sort of painterly, like excellence, where all of these 60-year-olds are like, we paint, like nude figures in dappled sunlight in marble enclosures. Like that is high art, right? Like as soon as you have that, then somebody has to be like, I'm going to paint a, fucked up cubist like lady with three eyes. Like that's where the art lives. Is when as soon as there's something that is sort of despised and pushed off the page as like that's not it. It's like that's probably it, right? Like I don't know, like the very fact that the internalized professors in your head are like queer people talking about cooking, that can't be art. I'm like, that sounds like that's more art to me in that case. Like if they weren't forbidding it, I wouldn't be sure. But since they're forbidding it, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree. I see what you're saying there. I again agree with it intellectually. I can buy that. I do think I don't know, there's some of my resistance is it would feel like a reduction emotionally. Yeah, like, oh, Marianne used to write interesting things and now she's just writing fluff, right?
but
Like
let me
it's
just
like
ask you this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just ask you this. Don't you think that if you this is my experience. My experience is I try to write lowbrow.
I know,
and
I
then
know,
I
no,
drift.
no, I know, no. I'm
And
sure
I feel like if you actually
yeah.
are like, this is just going to be queer cooks in ancient Sri Lanka talk. First of all, that's fascinating already. Like the amount of cultural specificity of like they're in ancient Sri Lanka. I mean, that's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But also don't you think everything else would creep in? Don't you think it would wander? I don't think you
No,
could. I don't think
I
you would have the
know.
discipline to just stay on like this is purely whatever thing you're imagining it being reduced to. I don't even think if you tried to stay there, you would stay there, right? It's
No,
like,
that's true. I mean, like I tried to write Perennial as a like just a very simple romance, like
yeah,
fluffy, and you read it. Like I ended up intercutting it with the poems I wrote during cancer treatment. I mean, like it ended up
yeah.
turning into this other thing. So yes, that's probably
How do we
true.
know, by the way, that like Proust's remembrance of things past was not intended to be fluff? Like, I
Yeah,
feel
that's
like
right.
maybe he was just like, I'm just going to talk about cookies for a while, and then
Yeah,
everything else just kind of crept in.
yeah. No, possible. I guess this to drag this back over to the genre conversation. I think another part of it is I get cranky about being categorized, right? And so like there was a period when I first started writing when I was an erotica writer, and like fine, I was writing erotica. That's what it was, no argument there. But and then when I started writing about Sri Lanka, and this is like what the reviews were saying, this is like the
Uh-huh.
general audience reaction, right? When I
Yeah.
started writing about Sri Lanka, I suddenly became a South Asian writer, right? Like they've,
Right.
even though I still had queer people having sex in the stories,
Right.
the
Right.
South
Right.
Asianness somehow became more
Trumped the
important.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah.
only get
Right.
one, and you
And
only
that's
get
what it
one, and the
was,
South Asianness
right?
trumped the
And like
yeah.
Salman Rushdie was very cranky about people want not, he's just like, can I just be a writer, or can I just
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
British writer at least? And he's like, no, they have to make me a. I think this is an Imaginary Homelands in one of his essays there, where
Hmm.
he's like super cranky about this,
Yeah.
and like that he
Well, and I
has
think
to
that's
be.
particularly racism has
Yeah,
an
sure,
well, maybe sexism has an inflection with that. More racism, really. I don't think it's
right,
quite as maybe when Virginia Woolf was writing,
yeah,
there was like woman writer was really a very distinct category. But now that like,
yeah, yeah,
because women are just honestly
right,
better educated than men at this point in history. They write a lot more. They like the written word more, like on
yeah.
average. So like I'm
So
not sure there's not enough room. I'm sure sexism would like it to be like, oh, she's a woman writer, but at this point in history, where all of
yeah,
publishing and
yeah,
like half of
yeah, yeah,
authors,
yeah.
like it's a little hard to pull that off. Whereas with racism, it still works pretty well to reduce
Yes.
people to
Yeah.
their,
No, I agree. I do, and then just to kind of like finish that thought, like so so I didn't like it with either of those times. I think I'd
yeah,
like it less. I have a really hard time presenting. This gets into marketing. Like I just have a hard time presenting myself as a cozy fantasy author. Like there's a way marketing really
yeah,
wants you to do one thing, which
yeah.
because that's easier to market, right? And
But let me
so
say this: would marketing succeed? I mean, given your like
I
that
know,
you and I
well,
both have these ridiculously eclectic checkered careers, like my heart goes out to that publicist who's trying to turn you into just a cozy fantasy writer, right?
yeah, yeah. No, it's true. I don't know if it would succeed.
Like, is
So
this really,
maybe this is all just in my head. Okay, fine, Ben. It's all in my head, and it probably I should just go ahead and start writing the thing and see what it
I mean,
turns into.
I mean,
But
I
I
think
do
I
have
think
this.
you're
I
on a
do.
roll being somebody who wrote all the things, so you might as well write another one of the things.
Oh, I don't know if I'm on a roll. I'm not sure. But anyway, the I'm somewhat in despair about my writing career at the moment, but that's a topic for another day. So I'm feeling very obscure at the moment. So people,
Obscure,
oh yeah, like
like
people,
that,
people
not
keep
discoverable.
no, more like people like I posted something a couple weeks ago that was like a little like a paragraph of my writing or whatever. And someone who has like followed me for years on social media was like, "Oh, this was great. I've never read anything of yours. Maybe I should go like look up your books," right? And I was like, "Thank you, but also like
But
a bit
also,
of
ouch.
yeah, like I feel like I've written a lot of things and they're all
I mean,
out there, but
there is a potential positive spin, which is that you just have a lot of different irons in the fire. And
I
it is, in
know.
some ways, there are people who are just enthralled with the,
I know.
because I mean, like, I'm just telling this back to you, but like you have
Yeah,
your
yeah.
Facebook project, which is the longest running, you know,
Yeah.
certainly the longest running blog of its kind on the internet or whatever, that is its own like magnum opus. Then there are some people who are, it's unsurprising on some level that there are some people who are fans of that and
yeah.
I don't
No,
know.
it
I mean,
is.
I'm similar, and I think I'm more content about it. I mean, I do get frustrated with my level of production often, but like I think, and I sometimes am envious. I mean, you're talking about like resisting categorization. I am sometimes have a sort of wish for an alternate timeline kind of thing where I'm like, if I like sometimes I have this feeling like if I could have just stuck with one thing and like really dug in and like that's what you're supposed to do. But like I've kind of I feel like 10, 15 years ago I was more like agonizing about that. Like I have to find my thing and do that so I can do the thing. And now I sort of at this point feel like I think it's kind of funny and hilarious that I have one of everything. I've been introducing people as myself as a writer to say I have one of everything. Like I have a short story collection, a novel, a tabletop role playing game, a computer game. Like I can't stay in the same. Anyway, it is what it is. It's unsurprising that some people are tabletop role players that have never read my fiction.
Sure.
People...
Right. Yeah. No, of course. But anyway, not to therapize me too much this episode because we've gone so off topic so many times. I'll throw in one last note. I had this long angsty conversation with George R. R. Martin a year or two ago, and where I was telling him about my writing career and like not being sure what to. I really have been kind of like stalled out for a couple of years and not writing very much, except when people ask me for things. But and then I can write. No problem. So anyway,
maybe I should just ask you for something every podcast.
I know, seriously. and then like George listened to all of this very patiently for like I swear an hour of me downloading all this, and then his conclusion, he was like, Marianne, I think you haven't figured out who you want to be when you grow up, and you should figure that out and then work on that. I was like,
wasn't easy for him to say because he's clearly figured out who he wants to be when he grows up. He is a past master at having a thing and doing that thing, and everybody in the world coming to a store. I guess I've made my peace with not knowing who
I'm going to grow up. All right.
I think I'm just not going to grow up.
Here, this podcast brought to you by the eternal adolescents, Benjamin Rosenbaum and Marianne Moenrad.
At the point at which now I'm, I've retired from my day job and I'm in like what's effectively like, I think I told you that it's like I was like I'm doing this bohemian thing of going off and being an artist, and I talked to the financial planner that we got saddled with because we live in Switzerland and we need, you need to all the insurances and everything. And he was just like, oh yeah, so you're retiring early. And I was like, oh shit, I'm just a coder who retired early. Like I'm not actually like doing this great bohemian leap. I'm just one of those goddamn, like, not that I'm retiring, not that I cashed out big as a coder. It wasn't like I stayed in Silicon Valley startups. But it's like, oh, I guess I'm just done, and I never have to grow up. Like I've managed to keep growing up at arm's length for long enough that maybe I'm like aged out of growing up. Like it's not an option now. Like I don't need to grow up. I just get to be an eternal child.
Now people should go read Stop the Clock, but
yes, start the clock. Yes,
start the clock. Ben's story about this.
Very much, no accident that I wrote that story.
Yeah.
And I think that, and in fact, I had a crisis when I was like 18 because I was sort of like, oh my God, I have to grow up. I was working at camp, and all the kids were like, we're just gonna not do what we're supposed to and go look for the rats that we've heard a rumor are like, living in the campus where we have this camp. And I was like, I'm supposed to make them come back inside and do what they're supposed to do. I'm not supposed to, but I like think their childlike glee in their fantasy world is so much more interesting than what I have to force them to do. And it's like now I have to be this drab, boring adult who like makes everything suck, right? And I really kind of had a crisis about it. Also, all my friends were moving away because of that American ritual where you all disperse when you're 17. It's very strange. And so I went and back and saw my psychiatrist who I'd gone to when I was like in 5th grade, and I had like one session. He was great. He fixed it, Dr. Balsrud. And he said, he basically was like, he listened to me a long time and he was like, being an artist is a way of never having to grow up, right? Okay. And then,
Yeah.
I mean, and then the other thing I figured out, I don't know if it was quite exactly in that conversation. The other thing I basically decided was that I decided, oh, if nobody, if you don't have adults, nobody can be a child. Like you can't have a childhood unless there are adults who are protecting you. You know what I mean? Like children without any adults around have to be the adults. And so, like, actually being a grown up is what creates the possibility of childlikeness, right? Of childhood. Like, so actually, instead of being like, now I have to go into the drab world of being an adult as if that was what I cared about, I could be like, oh, I'm someone who really cares about childlike joy. But it is behooves me as someone who's now old enough to do so to spend part of my time creating the conditions for childlike joy, right? Like creating the structures and doing the actual, boring or whatever work of creating these structures and preconditions that people can have childlikeness. And then when I'm off duty, I can go, you know what I mean? Like I'm only doing as much of that as is necessary. Because what I actually like is, us, going and looking for the rats that we have heard a rumor are running around the campus or whatever, like going astray and wandering, being Snufkin. But like, you gotta be Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama enough. You gotta pitch in and be Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama enough so that there's a house so that when people come back on their adventures, there are sandwiches waiting for them and like beds they can hibernate in, right? Like that's yeah. So being a grown up is a thing I do as needed to facilitate as much being a child as
Yeah.
can happen.
Yeah. No. And I don't think George was saying that I wasn't grown up in that sense so much
Sure.
as like more the and Kevin has said this sort of thing to me too, that he doesn't
Yeah.
quite, he's a mathematician. He starts working on a problem and then he just keeps working on that problem possibly for years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe solving it, maybe not. And he doesn't quite understand my switching from thing to thing to thing to thing and
You
sort
do
of
flit.
yeah, and he's like, can't you just wouldn't it work better to like pick one thing and just focus? And I did that for grad school. Like when I was
Yeah.
working on Bodies in Motion, I focused in. And I did it
Yeah.
with Feast when I was researching that book and writing it. Like I did that obsessively for months and but
Why did those work? Like what usually stops you that didn't stop you in those cases, perhaps is a way to frame the question.
they were both very interesting and challenging projects.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I got invested in them and it's not like I just abandon things constantly, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's that I don't know.
I mean, I have a lot of this too, right? I have like always 12 things
Yeah.
going. I have found it very pleasurable to have like a big project and dig in, right? Like so
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so it used to just flit, and now I'm back in a phase of flitting because the unraveling was a big project. Graham Apart was a pretty intense project, although relatively short. And then the Ghost of the Golem was a big thing, and I actually really liked having a clear mandate and a clear like having it be a marathon and not a sprint and being just like I got to put in my words today. I didn't always like it in the sense that often I had to bribe myself with computer games to do my daily words because I was like this sucks
Mhm.
at various periods where it was running dry. But like I generally appreciated the sort of orientation, the not being torn. And now
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
kind of back to having like 12 irons on the fire. And I'm sort of enjoying that, but I'm also kind of like frustrated because nothing, of course, gets done when you're doing 12 things at once, right? Like eventually
Yeah, yeah.
occasionally something will pop off and be done, but there's a lot of, switching.
So
Um,
I think that I can answer this now. I had to think about it a little bit, but like Bodies in Motion, I wrote uh, 20 years ago, right?
yeah.
And I was very optimistic, and the optimism mostly paid off. It got picked up by a big house, right? Like I did the
Uh-huh.
work, sent
Yeah.
it out, got picked up, got
Yeah.
published, all went well, great reviews. So, and then Feast, the cookbook, I wasn't sure if it would be easy to sell a cookbook, but I had no ego around doing it indie instead, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that
Oh
was so
yeah.
there was
Okay.
no issue there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I knew lots of people wanted it. When I did the Kickstarter, it funded in like 3 days, so like So that was
And
clearly
possibly
like,
because it felt like it was in the domesticity box rather than in the writing box on some level.
I don't.
Like, because I don't think you
Well,
agonize in the same way about whether, you know what I mean? Like whether
yeah, I
it's
guess,
like high art
but
enough when you're
yeah, maybe.
gardening or cooking.
Yeah, although I did do the book pretty seriously in the end, but like,
Well, yeah,
but
I mean,
like,
it's I mean,
because yeah,
I'm not saying
but
that's
yeah,
real. I'm not
yeah,
saying it
yeah,
gets
yeah,
less
yeah,
craft or is less
yeah, yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah,
I'm just saying the
yeah,
bugaboo in your head doesn't, I don't think you go out into the garden or like, but is this
yeah.
high gardening? You know what I mean? Like, maybe you
But
do.
I
I don't know
think,
enough
but it's
about
not.
gardening, but
But I think what's happened.
is this more the fanfic of gardening or is it the Proust of gardening? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you have that or are you just like, let's garden?
No, I definitely have. When I write about gardening, I absolutely have anxiety because there's so much you can get wrong, right?
Okay.
Like it's so
Sure.
there's and even with the cooking,
Sure.
there was like authenticity
Sure.
questions
Sure.
and accuracy questions and so on. But anyway, putting that aside, the the problem with the novels,
Mm-hmm.
these book length works, is that I've written 3 of them and not sold them. Like it's just discouraging, right? And so
Yeah.
it's hard to like
Yeah.
launch into another one that I'll work on for 2 years and then also not sell. Like that's what it's feeling like right now.
That's
So
interesting. It's interesting because sometimes we have conversations about shorter works, particularly essays, but I feel like also short stories, where you're just sort of like, well, this is the hourly rate I calculate because when I write it, I'm obviously going to sell it. Do you know what I mean? And then the
yeah,
novels
yeah.
feels like the opposite thing, and I don't know why there's such a big gap. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I don't know, that's my historical record, right? Like
yeah.
I've sold every story I've written, I've sold by I think like the 3rd place I've sent it to, right? Like I just sell them all, right? So and the same thing with the essays. Usually the essays I write when someone asks me for them, and so I just sell it right
I
away.
mean, why?
So whereas the novels are just sitting. So
Like, why? I mean, but you feel like, I mean, I may know the answer to the question, but like, why? Um, is there does it not feel like a win if you just spend a year writing short stories rather than writing a novel? Does that feel like it's disqualified or like it's waiting or like it's not being serious? Because
no,
I mean, if really even
no,
if you want to go in the
no.
literary canon, like a lot of great writers were short story writers, right?
No, no,
Principally.
no, no, no. That's fine. It's not that. But I like my novels. I want to
Yeah.
see them out in the world,
Sure,
so,
sure, sure.
you know,
Yeah, but I guess
so,
I mean, if your tendency is to flit and you're beating yourself up for not working on stuff, it just seems like a natural thing would be to like, I'm going to write 12 short stories. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to write another collection of short stories, like
yeah.
because
No, I've got,
a the track record is good. I mean, you might consider conceptual because Bodies in Motion is a story cycle, right?
yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah,
individual
yeah,
stories that are
yeah.
all. You might consider trying that because if your track record is great at selling the stories, it would certainly be less discouraging if it's like, well, I did sell all the stories, and then there's a separate question of selling the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, The Stars Change is also a story set, and and so I have another one. I have the Jump Spaces
Yeah,
is a set of short stories set in
right.
my world, most of which have already been published, and one or two are unpublished,
Have you tried,
because I
by the way,
haven't.
doing like the Jump Space Omnibus? Is that ever a thing that's come up?
Well, this gets complicated because Judd was going to bring it out at
Oh, okay.
uh, his press, and then Riverside was going to do the print books, but there are complicated background reasons for both of those being on hold.
So that so that you should say that project exists, but it's stalled,
It's
basically.
stalled, yeah. So
Sure.
like, and like, I'm not sure whether to pull it away and like try and find the process of trying to find somebody else to publish it is exhausting to me. Like I
Okay.
find that like
Right.
really hard to do, and I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do.
Well, and I
So
mean, also,
yeah,
I guess one of the advantages of writing a novel is it's a way to get an agent, and an agent would be a person that you could be like, hey, can you sell this Jump Space Omnibus?
yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
That was my plan. My plan was to sell the sci-fi novel set in the Jump Space universe, one of the two that I've
Mm-hmm.
written,
Right.
and then have the Jump Space Omnibus available as a loss leader kind of thing to
Right. Right.
that publishers like usually. So
Yeah.
so anyway, so yeah, that book is written. It's
Yeah.
written and sitting around. So
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
um, so anyway,
but you could start if you're like,
I could start another one. Yeah.
Well, you could just go to a different thing. You could do like, now we're going to do like queer cooks in ancient Sri Lanka. Having a long conversation seems like an amazing place to start. And I don't think it's going to stay. I agree with your Facebook feed. And who says it's going to stay there? Like, maybe there will be plenty of daring do. It just feels like whatever. I find that a lot of times, if I get in my head about like, is this the right thing? Is it important? Like, just trying to trick myself into being like, well, this isn't, like, no, it's not important, but I'm just doing this for a minute. Like, like literally the Ghost of the Golem, I was like, you know what, I'll do a game, and that'll be quick because it's a game, so I won't be as invested, and it'll be like, it'll be fun because I'm coding, and like, I'll just do that for a sec while I, and then I'll think of like the great important novel I'm supposed to be writing, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, that was a clever way of tricking myself into writing 500,000 words, right? Like, it's there's something to be said for just lowering the bar, So
I did take one little step in that direction I scheduled co-writing at my new studio once a month.
Nice.
Just once a month. But I'm like, okay, I'm blocking out that time. I'm going to show up and I have to start working on something because I'm going to be sitting there claiming to be co-writing with people. So
well, and it does seem like you've got yourself, like, there's an interlocking problem where you're doing a lot of things that aren't writing, which would be great if you were fully enjoying doing a lot of things that aren't writing instead of suffering about not writing. But then the fact that you're doing all those things makes it very hard to get the momentum to start writing, which makes you avoidant of writing, which makes it easy to do all the things because, of course, they're not writing, right? So it's like, that's a little bit of a
someone should pick me up. And have you read I Capture
the
Castle?
Well, you do like going on retreats. Maybe you should go on. Maybe you should go on.
I can't right now. I'm opening a store in a couple weeks, but I am sort of thinking about where can I do a retreat? I'm going to try and figure that out. When can I do a retreat is really the time more than anything else. But maybe I can schedule that in after our workshop, perhaps. And the Nebulas.
Which, by the way, listeners.
Yeah, that's right.
Registration is now open for the Speculative Literature Foundation Spring Workshop.
I feel like
before the Nebulas.
This episode has not been a good ad for me as a writing teacher, but I swear I'm a good writing teacher, even if I have lost all faith in my ability to sell a novel. So I'm going to come back next time we record and be like, yes, I started the thing then, and it's great, and I love it. So
it sounds great. I bet our students find it relatable that we also, have struggles. I considered pitching. I'm also teaching some Clarion on West online courses. Considered pitching them by being like, I am really good at losing awards. I can teach you how to lose an award like nobody's business. And losing awards is great. I have no idea what winning an award is like. Haven't done that. Don't know if it's good or not. Losing awards, really fun. And I will teach you how to lose them.
That's hilarious. So, that is awesome. I want to. We should start wrapping. I had one other thing that I was going to say about the this original topic of subgenres and all of that. I saw Catherine Kitcare. I don't know if you've read her novels. She fantasy author. The DeVere series. I read a lot of them in the 80s. She's great, and she's still writing. And she had posted on Facebook something about like, I was really stalled and stuck, and I finally realized it was because I was trying to write to this particular subgenre that's hot right now. And she's like, I just can't do that. I have to write the thing that interests me and then worry about selling it later. So I just wanted to put that bit of philosophy out into the world. I know people who write to genre, and like if you join like the 20 books to 50K, they are all about, like, that Facebook group is all about like figuring out what are the hot genres, writing fast, writing to the genre, and so cozy fantasy or whatever it might be.
Lit RPG is big.
Yeah, lit RPG, and using tropes like friends to lovers and whatever. Like people like these, not friends to lovers, like enemies to lovers. That's
enemies to lovers.
Enemies to lovers.
They don't, people don't mind friends to lovers.
Yeah, also friends to lovers, but
only one bed.
Yeah, but figuring out what's hot and then writing that. And I guess I would just sort of say, like, if you can do that, more power to you. And but it might, I
Well,
don't know,
and
I
I
you
also
know,
think
like,
there's interesting because there's marketing categories and then
mhm,
there are literary subgenres, and
mhm.
they overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And one kind of thing is the sort of thing you're talking about, which is very, we usually reference the 10 books to 50K or whatever, 50 books to 10K,
20
whatever it is.
books to 50K.
20 bucks to 50K, 50 bucks to
That's
10K is my goal.
yeah.
We often reference them as the exemplars of sort of like the commercial,
Yeah, yeah.
like approach. But like, I think that equally possible is the case where I just think there's another axis, which is like sometimes people are alone. And then if they find community, it's
Mhm.
really energizing. And sometimes people feel like they have to be coming up with something nobody has ever thought of before, and that just leaves them in a very blank state. Like as soon as they think of
Mhm.
something, they're like, "Oh no, I thought of it. Therefore, I must have heard of it. So someone thought it." You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
and that it just like feels like the wrong way to. It feels like reacting with. It feels like
Mm.
reading. I mean, I've sort of like reading something and being like, "Ooh, I want to be one of these guys." Like,
Yeah.
is also an experience where it's not like, can you squeeze yourself into the hot genre or whatever that's going to like maximize profit? It's more like, wow, this seems cool. And like sometimes sometimes you run
I
into
think I
something
think
where
I
you're,
think if you get excited by it, I think
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I feel a little burned on this just because I had that whole experience with my agent where he kind of took me on
yeah,
saying, he wanted me to be the next, like, the South Asian Game of Thrones, right?
yep,
Like,
yep,
and I was
sure, I
perfectly
remember,
happy. I was perfectly happy to try to write that. I like Game of Thrones. I like South
sure,
Asian stuff.
sure,
And then I start writing, and what I give him, well, first of all, he like recommended The Godfather to me as a model, and so I went and read it, which I hadn't before, and I
hmm,
was like, this is a good book. And I
yeah,
tried to write something like that, and I gave it to him, and he was like, this seems very like it was not plausible, not
yeah,
believable, not like
yeah,
whatever. Like I was clearly kind of like forcing it.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah,
and then
yeah. It
you
wasn't
know, and
authentically,
and then I took another draft that was a little further, but like he kind of ended up saying like I'm not I that he thought I had made a mistake trying to encourage me to write commercial
yeah,
epic stuff, and that I
right,
really wanted to tell intimate family stories, and that's what
hmm,
I
hmm,
should write. And so
yeah,
I still get a little cranky about that because I feel like you can merge the two. You can
sure,
do intimate family stories that are also epic, I
sure,
think, but maybe
sure.
I don't know. But
I mean, there's there's the families in Games of Thrones are often quite intimate with one another. Um,
but I guess what I was trying to get at was just
yes.
this idea of like it's if you can find something you love that
Yeah.
is a community you're excited about or a fan fiction space that you're excited about. I remember Kel
Yeah.
Bacchus at one point was told me that she was like she had been stuck on writing her own stuff,
Hmm.
and she started writing Star Wars fan fiction, and it
Yeah.
re-energized her. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's great if that works for you, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also like maybe it won't, and that's
Well,
okay
I had a
too,
similar. I mean,
like yeah.
the experience I had that resonates with that is that I sort of before when I like the 2008 Hugos, I think I went out and my collection had just come out and gotten great reviews, and all the editors
Mhm.
and whatever were like, "Do you have a novel?" And
Mhm.
I was like, did a lot of thinking about like what would be the thing that I should write, and I was kind of like, it sort of felt like the signals I was getting and like what all the editors were saying was sort of like, well, you should like do a Michael Chabon thing, right? You should do
Mm.
like a very sort of like Jewish history, but also accessible and kind of literary, like maybe metafictional and like, you know what I
Mm.
mean? Just like these are all things you do,
Mhm.
that you clearly are yourself. And this would be really saleable. And I was like, I should write that. And then like, I don't know, I spent 6 months being like, no, you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
this
yeah.
seems like such a thing that a Benjamin Rosenbaum would write, except I have no idea what to write. You know what I mean? Like, it's just,
Mhm.
and then I ended up writing. I remember talking to people about the unraveling and being like, yeah, I'm gonna write the. I just sort of described it, just watching their faces fall, like, oh no. I just like, that'll be so hard to sell. And I just agonized for a while, and I was just like, I just have to write the book I know how to write. Like, that's the one
Yeah.
that I know how to write now. Maybe I'll come back to this, other thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I agree. Like, you can't
Yeah.
force it. I mean, maybe somebody can, but we can't. You
No, we
have to,
can't.
you have to
Yeah.
tap in. And even the people who do, even the people who are very like commercially oriented or whatever, I think they find something to get excited about. I think we talked about
Mm.
this before. I remember reading some story about or interview with the Sweet Valley High writer who wrote like 500
Yeah, yeah,
Sweet
yeah.
Valley High books, in which it's always like page 30, always, there's a fight about
Yeah.
this or whatever. But she's just like overflowing with excitement and exuberance about it. She wasn't like, oh God, I got to kick out another. She's just like, that's really what she liked doing. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah,
it's like, what
yeah.
if you could find your groove and the thing you love doing, and it
Yeah.
clicks.
You
But
would think I would be bored with making chicken curry by now because I've made it so
right,
many times, but I'm
yeah,
not. I actually
yeah,
enjoy it. I
yeah.
find it
If you've
comforting and,
if you've got a groove,
yeah.
exactly. I I make now the same breakfast about 75% of the time. Anyway, the the and then sometimes, but I think, yes. So I guess the takeaway, as we always say, I think, is sort of like seek joy, right? Like, go
Yeah,
after the thing that
sure.
excites you. And I think subgenres or tropes or something can be like that. You can be like, ooh,
Mhm.
this will be fun. And I guess the most, like, an experience I've had with that, like, two things. I'll say two things about me and that. One is that formal things often excite me, like formal, like matters of
Yes.
form. And one of the
Mhm.
things, reason I wrote The Ghost of the Golem, is that I read this description of like Joseph Games' take on writing interactive fiction. And I was like, ooh, that's really, like, that's an
Mhm.
exciting, like, toolbox to play with. Like, it's
Right.
doing a different thing with narrative than I have done so far. And it like, it sort of felt exciting, like,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and also this thing that I like to do, that I now have this sort of go-to thing of doing these pseudoepigraphies, where it's kind of like, and I actually just sort of I just sort of like, I failed to get started with one of these because I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Um, but it didn't work so far. But, like, I started with the Book of Jashar, which is a missing book of the Bible, and then I did one that's like a piece of, like, a forgotten, like, a page of the Talmud that didn't actually happen. And so I have these ideas of doing, like, the Geniza. The Cairo Geniza is like this massive store of documents that they found going back to, which are all these ordinary, like, people's letters and like diaries and stuff. It's all this, like, it's actually, in medieval studies in general, not just Jewish medieval studies. It's like a huge source. Like, there are, like, a lot of people who are studying Christian Muslim societies are like, well, we don't have any written records, so we're just going to compare, like, what is in the Geniza, because the Jews kept all the pieces of paper. Um, uh, anyway, so I was like, I could do one of those. Anyway, so it's like, it's just kind of like um a thing that feels like a way in to riff on taking this formal, like, this is what this kind of document looks like, and then, like, doing essentially a pastiche of it. Um, so I don't know. Those aren't exactly. That's not. Neither of those are really subgenres exactly. I guess Choice of Games is kind of a subgenre as well, but it's also really just like. But in both cases, it's kind of like the formal, like the puzzle of doing a story that works like that. That
Mhm.
I think is sort of a way in.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I
yeah.
yeah. No, the intellectual structural play, I think, has really supported a lot of my writing, right?
Uh
Like,
huh.
in
Yeah.
keeping me engaged, right? Like, the this is what grad school was great for. It gave me like an opportunity to like do a lot of different structural experiments, and
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. So whatever. As a way in, I was thinking recently it would be fun to do something where, so there's this thing, this kind of, you're reminded me of this with the what you're saying about the Geniza. Geniza, is that what that's
Geniza.
called?
The Geniza. Yeah.
Geniza. So
Yeah.
there's an essay in something, The Presence of the Past.
Hmm.
There's an essay that's where he's looking at these um, monks' histories of of ancient Sri Lanka, and he's talking about how they're kind of like taken as like they're taken as fact, right? Like they're taken as like, but if you go and you look at the stories, you can see that they got rewritten by dueling bands of monks
Oh,
over the centuries as different groups came into power.
An edit war.
And seriously, and I was like, that would be a great little story from the point of view of the dueling monks, like,
right, the dueling monks, and like excerpts of the different,
yes, exactly,
thing,
right,
and then the next guy comes in and they rewrite it, and
that's right, they're like, like he portrayed our guy as like, as having all these flaws. Our guy was great. It's his guy.
That sort of reminds me of it sort of reminds me of a lot of biblical stuff too. I mean, one thing is that Deuteronomy is kind of like this retelling of Exodus and like a bunch of stuff that came before Leviticus, except it's from a totally different political perspective, right? Like there was like it's very interesting that it's kind of like and you don't think about that because we're used to reading the Bible as just sort of this like one document saying one thing, but like it's not the same. You know what I mean? Like you could see these threads of different levels of authorship. Anyway, so it's like there's definitely dueling monks. One of the things do you know who Huldah is? She is probably one of the more important. Like she doesn't get a lot of space in the text, but she's essentially like there's some sort of implication that she's really the author of the Bible. Like she is because she's a prophetess in the reign of King Josiah, when historically it seems like that's when Deuteronomy was written. And there's a whole bit in the Bible where it's like she has a vision and she's like, there's a lost book in the temple, and they're like, they go and find it and are like, look, this is the book that coincidentally says everything that we like it explains why, and it's just very much like, she's like just in this era where it's like she found a book that happens to be anyway
interesting. Yes.
Yeah, so she's like, like you're dealing monks. That's another one of those historical moments. All right, maybe we should wrap up.
We should wrap. So that was something about subgenres, and
this was about a lot of stuff. Subgenres very broadly defined, including Star Trek and Judaism.
There we go. And fan fiction, and
influence, and community,
anxiety and influence. Yeah, I think my like closing statement would be anxiety of influence is probably not serving you. So
right.
Like,
yeah, I would. Yeah, like influence is great.
Yeah, we're pro influence.
Find what brings you joy.
Yeah,
and you are not. I think the thing about anxiety, this fear of not being original, is like what I would sort of want people to be in the space of like is like you're going to be original. Like you're a person who is distinct from other people, and actually it is true that like a sort of apprentice level writing is often sort of like imitative, but that first of all is useful. Like that's how Renaissance painters, the apprentices just painted exactly what, you know what I mean? Like that's,
you go to the art institute now and you see the students set up copying the masters.
Painting, right?
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. And the other thing is that as you trust yourself more, you can't help but put your own spin on things. You can't, you know what I mean? Like it takes it. Let's put it this way: to be a great art forger is a talent. If you can really write exactly like your influences, there's probably money to be made. But like, you know what I mean? Like, but you're gonna be like, originality is an inevitable, and everybody, and what people like in art is always a balance and a tension, a fractal layering of originality and the familiar, right? Like if it's completely original, nobody would understand what you were talking about, and if it's completely familiar, people would be bored. In any medium, in any, it's always like a dance between those things. So go find what brings you joy and participate in it.
Put your own spin on it. Yep.
Put your own spin on it. You will. You can't help but put your own spin on it. You will put, if you dive in and and start listening to yourself, and trusting yourself, then you will inevitably.
And right, like that part of the right what interests you is also the, like when I this is I guess a last tip, like when I'm revising a story, if I find I typically retype the whole thing. And
Yeah.
if I find myself bored
Yeah.
when I'm retyping a section, then I know like, well, if it's boring me, it's going to bore readers. And so like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
something to like work on, right? So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
keep your stories exciting to you, I
Yeah,
guess.
and I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, and I just noticed this today that I was struggling with something, and I wrote a bunch of stuff. I was like, and I was like, what was originally interesting about this? Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like if you
Yeah.
started it, then something had caught your attention, and so if it
Right.
gets boring, it's probably that you strayed. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? You kind of,
Yeah.
and I think what I did today is to follow some kind of conscious idea I had about what the story was going to be,
Mm.
and too quickly. Like I
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
off the feeling that it was coming from
Yeah.
onto a hypothesis about what it was supposed to be, and I
Yeah.
just need to cut those 500 words because that was,
Sorry. It happens.
that's fine.
That's okay.
It's
Yeah.
like that's another thing. I think it's important to take the stuff loosely, right? It's important to be
Mm.
like it's experiments. You're doing experiments until
Mhm.
something clicks, right? So
Yeah.
it's fine to have stuff on the cutting room floor.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
This has been
Mohanraj and Rosenbaum are humans.
Stay Human.
Yeah.
Hey humans, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more so you don't miss future episodes of Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Leaving us a good rating also helps us reach a wider audience. If you want to reach us directly to ask questions or continue the conversation, you can email us at mrah@speclit.org. This podcast is hosted by Marianne Mohanraj and Benjamin Rosenbaum. Editing and show notes by Connor Nevitt. Music composed by Thor Bremer. And cover art by Stephanie Bailey. Thanks for tuning in to Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans.